Okay. So, these gentlemen are debating the labor theory of value, apparently. Opening statements are going to be between 5 and 10 minutes. If you go shorter, you're allowed. Um, and we're going to move from opening statements to an hour or so of open discussion. If you would like to ask a question of either of our debaters, you can ask them in a super chat. I will also have a brief period at the end where if you want to join the server and call in to ask them questions directly or challenge them on anything, you are welcome to do so. That will last about half an hour. So this debate should ideally go for about an hour and 50 minutes, roughly, all told. All right, so who wants to go first? How do you want to do this? Do we care? Coin toss? What?
So the first thing I should say is that it's not just going to be about the labor theory of value, but I also want it to be more of a like contention between the labor theory of value and the subjective theory of value. But we are probably gonna be focusing a lot on the labor theory of value itself. So it's fine for me, however you want to call this debate.
Okay. Well, it makes absolutely no difference to me. Either way, half the audience is going to disappear because it's a Marx debate, and that's just how it goes. So, who wants to go first?
I could go first if.
I feel like Victor dressed up the nicest for this, so he should get to choose.
Right. So I'm actually indifferent on this,
right.
but I'm gonna let Sulu go first since he decided first. So.
Okay, brilliant. All right, Zulu, you have 10 minutes, or however long you want to go.
All right. This is a debate over which theory of value is correct, the Marxian labor theory of value or the Austrian subjective theory of value. To answer this, I believe my opponent would agree, we must be scientific. Which theory correctly explains the status of economic value within man's life? This is key. Economic value has nothing to do with frogs, or rocks, or electrons. It is something that is particular to human beings. Why might this be? Why is it that only humans have such a thing as value, but nothing else does? The answer is that there is a fundamental difference between humans and everything else we know of. Namely, humans have a conceptual faculty, and thus free will. Only humans have this capacity, the ability to choose between a number of alternatives. Therefore, if we are to be scientists and scientifically study man, we must take into account his nature as a volitional being, a being that can choose, plan, and act purposefully. This is what makes human action distinct to any other action performed by any other entity. My opponent cannot do this on his philosophy. He's not just arguing for the labor theory of value, he's specifically arguing for the Marxist labor theory of value. This means that his entire methodology, through which he claims to be able to demonstrate the labor theory of value, must conform to the broader Marxist philosophy, or else he finds himself in a terrible contradiction. Namely, my opponent will, on some level, be relying on dialectical materialism. This thesis has two parts to it, the materialism and the dialectics. The materialist metaphysics is on the order of the billiard ball model, that the only thing that exists is matter in motion. On this theory, the mind is at best an irrelevant waste product. It has no causal power, no ability to do anything. So whilst you might think that you have a certain goal in mind, certain thoughts in your head, and you then choose to follow through on them, on the Marxist grounds, this is completely out. Rather, to the Marxist, your actions determine your thoughts, and your actions are similarly determined. Without free will, it is simply nonsensical to have such a concept of value. If all there is matter in motion, what makes man so special that he has such a thing called value? And what makes his labor so special that he can somehow create this value? These surely must be actions, just like the action of a rock rolling down a hill or an electron traveling down a wire. Are the actions of these inanimate, mechanistic objects also classed as labor? Must we also account for all the work being done by the wind to send a ship across the ocean? This is already quite a sticky position, but it gets even stickier when we consider the second half of dialectical materialism, namely, the dialectics. The Marxist billiard ball metaphysics does not proceed according to the laws of physics or mathematics. Rather, it proceeds according to the laws of Hegel. The dialectic process has it that first there is a thesis, which generates its antithesis, which is then united into a synthesis. Under these terms, it is not clear just how odious and unscientific a view this is. This means that you have a proposition P, which generates its opposite, not P, which are then unified into the synthesis. This is a metaphysics of contradiction. The Marxist labor theory of value is a claim which is paraded around as scientific so vigorously by the Marxists that we often forget what they mean by scientific is a process embroiled in open contradiction. The Marxists take their dialectical materialism to its extreme in applying it to logic itself. They claim that the laws of logic we all know from Aristotle are really just capitalist logic, and that my insistence that a scientific theory not contradict itself is simply something that I am determined to believe based on the economic conditions of the day. If only I was conditioned correctly, then I would have the correct proletarian logic, and would understand that such contradictions are perfectly logical. Thus, I want you to all make a mental note of every time my opponent attempts to forward arguments that purportedly support his thesis, that, on his own terms, he is simply predetermined to believe this, and that insofar as he uses the ordinary logic we all know about, he is using capitalist logic to try and defeat capitalism. So, let's take the actually logical approach to this. We know that men can make choices and plans of action. They may desire to utilize certain means towards whatever ends they personally select. This is where value comes from. It comes from a man's thoughts. He decides that a hot dog would be more satisfactory to him than $5 in his pocket, so he makes a trade with the hot dog vendor. The hot dog vendor has similarly decided that $5 would be more satisfactory to him than the hot dog, and so he also agrees to the trade. What we can say from this situation is that the man values the hot dog more than $5, and the hot dog vendor values the $5 more than a hot dog. Notice, there is no equation of value here. There is a double inequality. The hot dog is not the same value as $5. Nobody in the trade thinks that. If it were the case that they had the same value, why would the trade take place in the first place? Why would anybody trade item A for item B if the entire value of both these items is just the labour that was put into them? If they took a different amount of labour, why would the loser to the trade agree to it? If they took the same amount, why bother doing the trade in the first place? We can see that any theory of value that seeks to equate the values of different goods simply cannot account for the phenomenon of trade. It is therefore a dead theory both on economic and philosophical grounds. That is, it cannot account for elementary economic phenomena, and it is based on a metaphysics of contradiction. That's me done.
5 minutes on the dot. Well done. Victor, you have 10 minutes, sir, please.
All right. So the first thing that we need to establish on a debate on the labor theory of value versus the subjective theory of value is what is it exactly that we're trying to explain when we talk about value, right? What is the phenomenon that we're trying to explain? And this basic phenomenon is what is the quantitative worth of commodities and why is it exactly what it is? In other words, we can refer to this question as being the question of the relative prices of commodities in market economies. Now, the relative prices of commodities are the quantitative worths of those commodities, and any commodity can potentially have as many other quantitative worths as there are commodities in the market, since they can be exchanged for some quantum of any other commodity, right? But underlying all of those exchanges, there is an immanent measure of the quantitative worth of those commodities, and that is exactly what value is, right? That is what we're trying to answer, that is what we're trying to explain with a theory of value, the immanent measure of the quantitative worth of commodities in market economies. And usually this question is phrased with the paradox of value, right? Which is that idea of, yes, maybe water is far more useful for our lives than diamonds, but nevertheless, it is far less expensive in the market, right? So we need to explain why this can be the case. And there are different contending theories on this. And this is what we're trying to answer, basically, right? So then, why labor values? Why should we believe in the labor theory of value? So the first thing is that the immanent measure of the quantitative worth of commodities in the labor theory of value is abstract, socially necessary, direct and indirect labor time that is required for the production of those commodities themselves. And we can attain this conclusion from a simple chain of logic that is derived from very simple premises of market economies. The first is that exchange is generalized, right? Meaning that in market economies, everything is up for sale. Everything can be potentially exchanged for some quantum of any other thing, right? And because of this, there is a need for a money form to appear in these types of societies, right? To solve the barter problem. We need a universal measure of the exchange value of these commodities, whether it is a fiat currency or whether it is some kind of commodity money. The next is that exchange is quantitative and measurable, right? In exchange, we see quantitative proportions of commodities that are being traded, and this can be stored in data sets using, I don't know, let's say, for example, the dollar value of those commodities. So they are also measurable and storable in data sets, right? And also exchange is a social process, right? It is not something that arises from nature. It's something that arises from a particular form of societal structuring, which is that of market economies, right? That is what we're talking about. Whether simple production or capitalist production, it is in a market economy where exchange appears and whether it is generalized. So then we ask, what is a thing that is quantitative and measurable in nature, that it is universal to all commodities, and that at the same time is a social property of these commodities? And the answer to this is abstract socially necessary labor time. So this is why we say that it is labor that is the source of value in these commodities, right? All right, so if this argument didn't fully convince you, we can also build mathematical models and simulations of actual market economies, whereby assuming some very simple things and starting from definitions of the nature of profits are equal to revenues minus cost, we can use linear algebra and differential equations to simulate an economy where these particular phenomena arise naturally from the interaction of a multitude of heterogeneous individuals, right? So it is the logic of market economies that the law of value emerges as an emergent property from it, independent of individual motives and valuations, okay? And this is something that, again, through mathematical simulations, we can also observe. And if these two things didn't convince you, we can also look at actual market economies and test empirically the predictions of the labor theory of value, which has been done on many papers. Now, I have a list of all the sources that I'm referencing. So President Sunday and Liquidzulu, after the debate, you can make this public if you want. I'll send you the link to it, okay?
I'll put the,
so
if you're comfortable with it.
The labor theory of value makes...
Sorry, I just muted myself. If you're comfortable with it, Victor, I'll pause your timer for a second. I can put it in the description of the video as well. And Liquidzulu as well. If you want to put any sources there, feel welcome. All right, as you were. My apologies.
All right, so the labor theory of value makes three main predictions. One is a cross-sectional prediction, another is a time series prediction, another is a structural prediction. There have been numerous empirical papers that have studied these particular questions, some of which have been done by very famous mathematicians and statisticians of the likes of Jacob Schwartz from NYU. And consistently throughout the empirical literature, we have found that the predictions made by the labor theory of value regarding the regulation of market prices by the labor values have been consistently met in the data for multiple countries, so not just for one or two, but for like many countries and throughout many different time periods as well. All right, but then we also have to answer, okay, but haven't we also have the chance to listen to a contender, right, to the subjective theory of value? What about subjective preferences? So the first thing that I would notice is that the labor theory of value does not ignore subjective preferences and subjective valuations. In fact, we could very simply start from the starting point of praxeology, and we can derive these exact same findings that I have just talked to you about, right? So the labor theory of value accepts the role of individual preferences and valuations in in the price formation in markets, but okay, we conceive them more as, let's say, disturbing factors that at a micro level and at a short run level can have distortionary effects, so they can push prices away from their competitive level, away from their labor determined level, but nevertheless, through time and at a macro level, they get overridden, right? Because the logic of the system continually overrides individual preferences. And we can see this in many examples like profit rate equalization, right? I'm guessing that Liquidzulu agrees with me that profit rate equalization is a phenomenon in market economies. And this is one instance of individual preferences being overridden by an overall logic of the market that simply has its own independent functioning, right? Even though individuals are needed for our comprehension, right? And they are valuable, right? But they are more valuable to be understood as distortionary effects that get smoothed out at a macro level and in the long run than as the main determinants of the long run competitive prices. And actually, neoclassical economists agree with us on this, because if anybody that has studied economics at a micro level, they know that the long run supply curve in a model, in a neoclassical model, is fully horizontal, meaning that it is determined at one particular price level, and this particular price level is the minimum of the average cost curve, right? So even neoclassical economists present a theory that is more or less similar, although it is far worse than the labor theory of value. All right, so what about subjective preferences then? Not only do we incorporate them, but we believe that they are insufficient in explaining value in market economies. Why? Because they do not meet the required criteria that I outlined at the beginning, right? Subjective preferences are heterogeneous, so they cannot be measured on a continuous and homogeneous scale, whether across individuals or within individuals. Subjective preferences are unquantifiable, so we cannot produce estimates of these preferences and test whether they do in fact determine prices. And subjective preferences are also not a social substance. Even though they are influenced by society, they are individual, subjective, and idiosyncratic. So therefore, they are not a universal or social substance, right? So how can we see the failure of the subjective theory of value in practice, right? Very simple exchange, like the one Liquidzulu gave. Two people exchange a commodity, okay? Exchange commodities in the market, and let's say that those commodities are worth $10. The subjective theory of value, at best, albeit in a controversial manner, can tell us that the reason why the exchange took place is because the two individuals believed that they could expect benefit from the exchange, right?
50
so
seconds,
aggregate
Victor.
utility after the exchange has increased. Nevertheless, the exchange value of those commodities, which is $10, was the same before the exchange and after the exchange. It hasn't changed, even though aggregate utility has increased, right? Therefore, what we can see is that these things are in different categories. They are things of different order, of different magnitude. We cannot explain one thing with the other, and this is the basic reason why we believe that labor theory of value is better at explaining actual values than the subjective theory of value. That's it for me.
10 seconds left. Well done. Okay, we know why you asked for 10 minutes now. All right, we're going to open up to an hour
I think
of
you're
open...
on mute, President Sunday.
I muted myself in Discord so you weren't hearing the clack of the thing. It doesn't look... It highlights it when you're not muted, or when you are muted as opposed to when... Anyways, 10 seconds on the dot, Victor. Well done. So we're going to open up to an hour of open discussion. If you want to, that will be followed by 15 to 30 minutes of question period. If you want to ask our debaters a question, ask it in the super chat. They will be asked in the order in which they appear. You guys have an hour. Go for it.
Right. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you if you had anything to say about my contention, because I think that your points were less directed on what value actually is and the labor theory of value and the subjective theory of value, and they were more focused on like philosophical, methodological foundations of dialectical materialism and the like. So, speaking primarily about this economic issue that we're talking about, do you have any contentions with what I outlined?
Yes. So I think if we're being this is why I had to bring in the methodology for this point, is I think if we're being scientific about men, we're looking at mankind, and we're talking about value, we recognize that value isn't a thing which can exist for anything else. There is no economy for rocks, right? And I mean, I think you were saying there that subjective preferences, like the choices that men are going to be making, they are basically just disturbing factors on the economy. They aren't actually the fundamental thing which drives the economy. But then I'm confused about why rocks don't have an economy, because they don't have any preferences. Like, could you have an economy between beings which have no preferences whatsoever?
Honestly, I don't think that is an interesting question. My point is that individual preferences are indeed like the gasoline of market economies, but they are not the determining factors as far as the aggregate outcomes in these economies are concerned, right? Because the aggregate logic of market economies overrides individual preferences. If you want, I can give you the very basic example of profit rate equalization, right? I wrote an empirical paper on profit rate equalization, and this is a very simple logic. If somebody is earning higher than average profits, people are going to drift into that industry. They're going to, in a sense, make that industry far more populated than it is right now. So the average price at which that particular commodity is sold is going to go down, thereby lowering the profit rate. This is an arbitrage process by which lower than average profit rate industries are going to experience an outflow of industries, and higher than average profit rate industries are going to experience an inflow until, through a turbulent process, these things get regulated. Now, nobody is wanting profit rates to be equal. Everybody wants their profit rate to be the highest one in the market, right? Everybody wants this. However, the outcome, the aggregate outcome, is something distinct, which is the equalization of profit rates. Do you agree with this basic logic?
So I definitely agree that everybody would want to have the most profit they possibly can, and that eventually it starts going down towards equilibrium. But I don't think that implies that there has to be labor is what creates value. I think you can account for that on the subjective theory, right? It's just
actually, if you read the papers that I sent you, it is at this particular equilibrium, at the profit rate equalized equilibrium, it is exactly that equilibrium, the one that produces the regulation of market prices by labor values, right? You can see this algebraically, but it's like very simple logic. If these things tend to get equalized, that equilibrium is going to produce market prices that are proportional to the labor values, which is what I'm contending here.
Okay, but so this you're doing aggregation here. You're saying as you aggregate, the subjective preferences seem to drop off, and they aren't very important. But isn't that exactly what you'd expect by aggregating? Because when you're aggregating, you're ignoring the individuals and what they're choosing. But then how is this an actual explanation of why people value things and what it means to value something? Because that is an individual question. It's not like society can't value something, because society doesn't have utility or anything like that.
Yeah, so I agree with you that people have individual preferences and valuations of things. But when we're talking about society, what we are interested in is what is the aggregate pattern? What is the aggregate outcome of all of these individuals with their heterogeneous minds working together in a particular social context? That is what we're interested in. So my theory is not a theory about whether individuals consciously and willingly decide for the labor to be the determinants of market prices. My theory is, even if people were exactly opposed to the labor theory of value, in practice, because of the logic of market economies, they will inevitably lead to that particular equilibrium. That is what my theory is trying to say. So at an individual level, people can do whatever they want. In fact, my theory is not like neoclassical theory where they are very perfectionist on everything, right? Individuals are utility maximizing. They have these continuous utility functions that they maximized in very nice and neat ways, and all equilibria are static. What I'm describing to you is a turbulent equilibrium, right? A turbulent equalization process, which is far more realistic, and it is a much better representation of actual economies, because if you look at the data, you will see that things don't exactly equilibrate instantaneously, right? Instead, they follow this process, and through long periods of ups and downs, they reach some kind of an aggregate equilibrium, right? And that is what we're trying to explain here.
Well, that's not the fundamental thing you have to explain. If we're talking about a theory of value, that's more fundamental than why do we get to equilibriums, right? Clearly, that question is going to require a prior answer to what is the theory of value. But the theory of value fundamentally is talking about why did somebody choose diamonds instead of water? Why did they choose water instead of diamonds? It's that type of question, which is why do I value X more than Y? What does that mean, right? That is the fundamental question. And I think only the subjective theory of value is able to account for this fact. And moreover, it accounts for it without introducing some sort of weird cardinal utility or anything like that. Like, it's just a preference. It's literally, this thing is better than this other thing. I think that's just the most, if you just introspect into your own life, That's just how we make choices. It's, I would prefer to have this debate right now than not. I'm foregoing everything else I could be doing right now because I subjectively value this more, not because this debate took more labor to produce, right? It's because I want it more.
So I am currently working on a research paper on praxeology, and I think that many of the things that you're founding your claims on are really poor foundations because they're poorly defined, because they're unsound when tested empirically, because they lead to tautologies that are meaningless. But I'm not fully going into like pure praxeology yet, right? If you remember what I said, that the labor theory of value is trying to answer is the question that any theory of value is trying to answer, which is the quantitative worth of commodities in market economies, right? The relative prices of commodities. How much do I need to give up of something in order to attain some quantum of another thing? In neoclassical economics, if you look at the general equilibrium methods, you see that in the short run, it is the relative marginal rates of substitution that explain these relative prices, right? Although this is a very bad theory for reasons that I actually agree with the Austrians on, because obviously you cannot have continuous utility functions. The concept of indifference is something that I do believe it's a useful concept, unlike some Austrian economists, although not all. But at least the continuous utility functions, that is obviously something that is a very poor model of human behavior. But praxeology is also a poor model of human behavior, and it doesn't really get to the answer that we are trying to, the answer to the question that we're trying to really answer, which is the relative prices of commodities, right? That is an emergent phenomena, an aggregate phenomena of market economies, and it is independent of individual valuations, although individual valuations affect it in the short run.
Okay, so you said two things there which I disagree with, both of them. So you're saying that the theory of value is, any theory of value, its fundamental job, what it's trying to answer, is the question of how do you get to relative prices, and you had a longer explanation of that. I completely disagree. It's not, because even without, even if you're on a barter economy, so there are no like prices, like there isn't, at least it's not the like money prices at least. You're trying to explain why does somebody want something more than the other thing? Why are they choosing A over B? That if we just take the Robinson Crusoe model, even let's just strip everybody else out. So even there's no exchange. Robinson Crusoe on the island still values things, right? So a theory of value would have to account for why does Robinson Crusoe do anything? Why does he choose to spearfish instead of picking berries, right? Why is he doing these things? And a theory of value which is just focused on why do relative prices come about, why do these prices obtain, that's not answering the more fundamental question. It's freezing the abstraction. And the second thing you said, which I completely disagree with, is that praxeology is a poor model of human behavior. Praxeology, it literally just starts with the assumption that, which I can prove, that humans have free will, and it studies humans as beings with free will. Nobody else is doing this, right? That's the correct way to deal with the science of humans, because humans aren't rocks, we're not electrons, we're not frogs, right? You don't want to study humans with the methods of physics. It doesn't make sense.
So, okay, so your 2 points. The second one first. Actually, through neuroscience, through behavioral economics, and through psychology, we can understand scientifically how humans actually behave in the real world. And it is far from the purposefulness and goal orientation of human action that is postulated by Mises in his work and by other praxeologists in their work. In fact, even like some prominent Austrian economists like Hayek, for example, do not believe in praxeology and accept empirical methods for their understanding of human society. And there has been a very strong debate in the Austrian School of Economics on what the actual implications of praxeology are, because my contention and the contention of some Austrian economists is that you cannot even derive the necessary welfare maximizing status of market economies from the starting point of praxeology. You will probably know these debates also. But okay, so we know that human action is not fully purposeful and fully goal-oriented, right? And there's plenty of empirical evidence from psychology, from neuroscience, and from behavioral economics that shows this. The best model of human behavior that I can think of is actually one proposed by Ariely, where preferences are constructed, okay, through our actions. They are not the determinants of our actions, but they are constructed through our actions, and they interact, okay, with unconscious and with some conscious processes and with memories in order to determine our behavior and our personalities. But praxeology itself is like really, really poor. And as soon as I get done writing my paper and I publish it, you can read it and you can see that for yourself. But this isn't the question, right? The question is, what is value? And value is, okay, you said it yourself, right? Is in a barter economy, things are still going to get exchanged, right? So the relative prices of commodities in that sense are going to be the ratios of things that you need to give up in order to get another thing, right? If I need to give up 2 apples in order to get 1 banana, that is the relative price of apples with regards to bananas, right? So it works, this theory works perfectly well also on barter economies. But barter economies, of course, are just like purely theoretical things. They cannot exist in practice in like purely generalized exchange economies because of the very fundamental problem in economics called the barter problem, which can only be solved with a universal currency, whether it is a money currency, a fiat currency, or whether it is a commodity money. And this universality, again, is what we're trying to explain, right? There's an immanent measure of the quantitative worth of commodities, and that is the abstract socially necessary labor time required to produce those commodities. And the empirical evidence also shows this. So you haven't given any reason for me to not believe in the labor theory of value. You just have told me, okay, we need to also look at individual valuations and find out why is it that somebody wants to give up this particular amount of their good in order to obtain some amount of other goods. And I agree, that is an important question, but that is a psychological question. It's not a question of economics.
No, so I'm saying I think I have given you a reason not to believe in the labor theory of value because it can't account for what fundamentally value is talking about. And it's also like the scientific way to approach this is to go, well, humans, they're volitional beings. They're not just the same as everything else. That's why, like, I mean, do you think that air does socially necessary labor time when it helps me get a sail ship across?
No, because in order to get the law of value, you need a particular social structure that so far only humans have been able to attain. But I am guessing that if another highly developed... Sorry?
Like, why is it that only humans have this social structure? Like, what does it mean to have a social structure? And why is it only humans that have done that?
Well, that is a question for neuroscientists and for evolutionary biologists, right? And they probably know this answer far better than me. My answer would be that this is because human beings have evolved to form social, complex social structures, right? And market economies are one way of organizing societies, but they're not the only way. And market economies have their own particular logic, right? That is what we're trying to get at.
Okay, so only humans have this because only they have developed these social structures.
Because only they have the cognitive capacity to be able to build these complex social structures. Yes, so far at least. Maybe in some other planet there's another intelligent species that is able to do something similar to us, or even like some higher form of social organization. I don't know that. But if you ask me why humans, I think that is not a question for economics. That is more a question for neuroscientists and evolutionary biologists. And they have given an answer of the kind that I'm just giving to you right now. So, but the second thing is, like, you say that you have a very strong contention with my claims because it doesn't get to what actually value is. I established what I talk about when I mean value, and what most economists at least talk about when they mean value. And even Austrian economists, if you read the works of Austrian economists, they also believe that this is what we are trying to get at, right? The relative prices of commodities. It's only that they believe that every single exchange is its own particular thing, and that is why we cannot generalize. But in reality, we can generalize. And when we look at the aggregate data, the only theory that has found empirical support over and over again in many different countries and across many different time periods is the labor theory of value. So that is something that just like, you have to contend with that. You cannot just ignore that and claim, oh, but my subjective preferences, because I already agreed, subjective preferences are important, but they are not the determining factors in this aggregate phenomena.
Okay, so you're saying that it's only humans have the cognitive capacity to build these social structures, But like, what specific capacity is it of humans that allows for this, and why do we need this cognitive capacity to have value apply? Like, what is it about being a super intelligent animal, namely a rational animal? What is it about that then yields this concept value?
So it's not like like there's different ways to talk about value, right? If you talk about value purely as a psychological valuation, then you need to ask psychologists, where do our values come from? And again, as I was telling you, there's plenty of empirical literature on preference formation and on behavior that contradicts the axioms of praxeology, right? And also, if we're talking about an aggregate level, what we can say is, okay, value emerges from one particular social structure. It's not even just capitalism, right? It's any society that features the generalization of markets. So you can imagine that even in a not fully planned socialist economy, some type of a law of value can emerge. Obviously, if the economy is fully planified, then the labor theory of value is not going to apply there. But let's talk about a very simple case, right? Simple exchange or simple production, where there's no class division between workers and capitalists, right? So everybody produces what they sell, and what they sell is exactly what they receive from their production, right? So even in this society, we still find, and this is actually the simplest case in which the labor theory of value has been tested, and it is where it fits the best, right? So it is an emergent property of a particular social structure, which is market economies.
Right. So it's a feature of market economies, but like it's at why do humans have market economies in the first place, which yields this thing of value? And you're saying that there's some psychology which apparently contradicts praxeology on this count, which would the praxeological account would be, well, we choose things, and that's where value comes from. So what is that psychology, and how does it contradict praxeology? What is its account of value then?
So nobody denies that we choose things. What we deny is the representation of how we choose things that is done by praxeologists, at least by Mises. He has like, do you know what the prerequisites for human action are for Mises?
Not off the top of my head, but it's like uneasiness, yada yada yada.
Yeah, so it's very simple, right? So Mises proposes in, I think it's like page 14 of the human action. He proposes this idea where the prerequisites of human action is that an individual has to feel some uneasiness, right? They then have to create in their mind an idea of a better state of affairs. And they have also to believe that their influence in the real world, so their action, their purposeful action, is going to have an impact that is going to, at least in theory, attain the desired state of affairs. Now, in psychology, we know that this is not how human beings act, right? We don't like reflectively think, oh yes, I feel some uneasiness. We do that sometimes, right? So we do this sometimes, but it's never like exactly like that. But sometimes we do things that resemble more or less that. What we know from neuroscience and from psychology is that human beings act on a wide range of influences, some of which are conscious and purposeful, some of which are not. They are like external forces, like perceptions, things that happen to us, but we do not never fully meet the criteria that Mises outlined, right? In fact, Mises describes humanity through those prerequisites. So he excludes from humanity babies, disabled humans that cannot act in that particular way. So I think that this is a really bad foundation, and psychologists and neuroscientists today purely, totally disregard this way of thinking.
Okay, so you were saying that we have all sorts of other influences, apart from just Mises's like felt sense of uneasiness, planning a better future, and thinking that you can get to it. What would be another, like, could you give an example of making a choice where you don't have any of that?
Yeah, so like sometimes goal activation in our minds happens completely in a purposeless manner, right? Where there's like this thing that suddenly like does something in our brains, right? Activates some neurological path in our brains, and suddenly we are compelled to act in a certain way, but we are not consciously deciding to make this choice, right? There are many experiments in like behavioral economics and psychology and the likes that have been done on this. There's like, for example, there's this study by Libet in 1993 or something like that, I remember, where he basically shows that human beings sometimes, okay, and this is still something that is being researched, but at least sometimes we can very clearly see that people, okay, become conscious of what they are doing seconds after they started doing what they're doing, right? So like the activation of our action happens before our conscious awareness of it, right? This is one particular form of evidence, but we can also have many different, there's also plenty of evidence coming from other studies that shows that our preferences are not the determinants of our actions, that unconscious influences impact our actions in like very strong ways. There's like a bunch of experiments on behavioral economics, for example. Like there's this experiment where like they played French or Italian music in a particular supermarket, and they found out that when they played a particular form of music, whether it was French or Italian, they suddenly found that French wines or Italian wines were suddenly far more demanded than they were elsewhere, right? So like if they were playing the French music, the French wines will be sold more, and if they were playing the Italian music, the Italian wines will be sold more, right? So there's like this external, like there's a huge amount of things that can influence our action in these ways that are totally unconscious.
So, like, let's say I go into a shop and there's a bunch of French music playing, and I think, oh yeah, you know what? I really like that Merlot that I had before, and I want some more Merlot. I'm feeling a sense of uneasiness there, prompted by being reminded that France exists. Of course, that makes me uneasy quite a lot. I'm feeling a sense of uneasiness, and I'm planning. You know, I'm in a shop. I can go buy some more Merlot, and then I believe that this will get rid of my uneasiness. That doesn't negate the thesis at all.
So the thing is that after the experiment, they asked the people why they chose the particular wines, and they gave bullshit reasons, right? They were like, oh yes, because the texture of this wine is particularly better, whatnot. We know what actually influenced their action, but none of them said, oh yeah, because I listened to this music, I was reminded of my French ancestors, and then I decided to buy the French wine now. Like that is not exactly how it goes. But this is one particular example. There are many examples, right? If you want, like I already finished this research paper, I can give it to you and you can take a look at all the evidence that I cite in there. But there's plenty of evidence there.
Sure, but I mean, that they give bullshit answers doesn't negate the thesis. That they don't introspect well enough to realize that they were hearing French music and that's what led them to that decision. They just get reminded of France, and then they remember about, oh, I had that nice wine before, which was a French wine, and oh yeah, I like the texture and everything. So then when they're asked, it's like, oh yeah, I like the texture. Like they haven't gone through the entire process, right?
Yeah, so that what I'm basically saying is that our actions are not fully, so I'm not saying that they're completely like automata. I'm saying that they're not fully conscious, that they're not fully purposeful, that constantly there is a mix of different factors, some of which are conscious and some of which are not. And here I cited like Ariely's preference construction theory, which basically says that preferences, rather than determining our actions, are constructed through our actions, and they, in a sense, interact dynamically with like memories and external influences like the environment, like social context and whatnot, in order to determine our actual behavior. But there's like a mix of these things, right? It's not just like automata or just purposeful, fully purposeful behavior, right? It's more nuanced and more complicated than that.
I don't think you've demonstrated that though, because at least with this example, like I'm able to account for that on complete total free will grounds, right? What was the other example you gave? That sometimes people get like where they have like a hook up to your brain and they like know what you're going to do before you do it. That also, I don't think, demonstrates that there is no free will or anything like that. That's just
this is not a debate on like free will. This is a debate on the purposefulness of our actions, right? Whether we are conscious of our actions at every single stage in our action making or not. And what I'm contending is that empirical evidence so far suggests that it is not. The debate on free will, that is a purely philosophical debate that, of course, is enriched by this evidence, but I don't think it has been fully solved yet. So I'm not willing to take like a fully determinist stand, although I am certainly favoring more that stand, because really, if you read all the literature on like cognitive psychology and all that, it's like very clear. But I'm not going to like fully endorse that position. I'm just going to say that irregardless of whether we have free will or not, our actions are determined by a wide range of phenomena, and the way that Mises describes human action is simply false. It's like unscientific.
No,
Like you can
so long as
say
you
that
have,
we have, yeah.
so long as you have
Sorry,
any, no worries. So long as you have like any level of choice, if you're choosing A rather than non-A, if that's a chosen action, and it's either chosen or it's not chosen, right? It's either or. If it's chosen, then you have some purpose in mind, right? Purposefulness is just a different way to describe free will. Your purpose was to get A rather than non-A, right?
Like you can describe purposefulness in like a tautological way, where you say like, okay, purposefulness simply means like the applying means towards certain ends, right? But that is really not what we are like interested in. And again, this is something that I discuss in my paper. We are not talking exactly about like human action here. Like our debate is on value, is on the labor theory of value versus the subjective theory of value. And I gave you a definition of value that is very consistent and very standard among economists, right? Value is the determining factor of the relative prices of commodities in market economies. I have given you a theory that is consistent, that is sound, that it has been met by empirical success, and we can see in simulations of actual economies. And you haven't given me any reason to not believe in that. Like you are talking about praxeology right now, and we can have this debate at some point in the future, but this is not the question, right? The question is value. And I also gave you a reason as to why subjective value is insufficient in order to explain what value is trying to explain, right? Because if you have a societal economy, so a societal market economy, right, where two individuals make an exchange, let's assume praxeology for a moment, right? Let's assume that praxeology is correct. You have two individuals making an exchange between equals, right? Meaning that, yes, they both benefit in terms of utility, but what they are getting is worth the same as what they're giving up, right? So if the two things are worth $10, that is their exchange value, and it is constant before the exchange and after the exchange, even though utility has aggregately increased, right? This is something that I think makes it very clear that these things are of different order, right? These are different categories. So conflating the two is a category mistake, basically.
So, I mean, the reason why I'm going into free will so much is because I think it's the only way to account for value for Robinson Crusoe on the island alone.
So let me
like
give it to you then, right? Let's assume for a second, I just gave it to you, like praxeology is fully correct. I am fully on board with praxeology, right? The two people made the exchange because they expected to benefit from the exchange. Why is it the case that both commodities are still worth $10 after the exchange? Right? So if you try to sell it again in the market, you're still gonna get $10 from it. I mean, obviously you can talk about depreciation, but that is like an extra phenomenon, right? Assuming no depreciation, right? You're still gonna get $10, even though utility has increased. So I agree with you, right? There has to be an inequality in utilities in order for there to be an exchange. But that inequality in utilities is not reflective of the underlying inequality in exchange values.
Well, so I mean, the reason why you're still going to get $10 for it in the market, assuming no appreciation or depreciation, is because there's still the same amount of supply and demand, right? Presumably, right? Unless a whole bunch of it is just rolled in from another market. But like that's why, because it's we're assuming it's been bid towards some sort of equilibrium price, where that's the price there that you can. If you're selling for less than that, then you're not making as much money as you could. If you're selling for more than it, then nobody's going to buy it because other people will underbid you.
And that is exactly that equilibrium that you're describing.
I'm going to be right back. No slurs, okay, Victor? I'm looking at you.
Okay.
All right.
That $5 for the hot dog, that in no way implies that people value the hot dog the same as $5. Nobody values it that.
Yeah, that's what exactly what I'm saying. Like what I'm saying is that individual preferences get overridden, right? It's not that everybody is wanting it to be the same. In fact, they want the opposite. But through the logic of market exchange, this is what happens, right? And the equilibrium that you are describing, that equilibrium we can characterize as the labor theory of value equilibrium. That is exactly why the labor theory of value explains that equilibrium. So yeah.
So like, the problem I have with this is you said there that you agree that nobody's valuing the hot dog the same as $5. But
Yeah.
why would that ever occur if all that matters is the amount of labor time? If that is the sole determinant of value, why wouldn't everybody value everything the exact same, right? Why wouldn't everybody just have like X-ray vision where they go, oh, I know exactly how valuable that is, and they would value it the same? Clearly, it's based on subjective preferences entirely. That's where value comes from. That's what value means.
So I think your question is a really good question, right? Why is it that people still value it differently, right? Why are these like unequal valuations among individuals? What I've said multiple times already, maybe I haven't been explaining myself clearly enough, is that even if individuals, which is the case, right? Even if individuals do not want this to be the outcome, it is still the outcome, because this is the outcome that arises naturally as an emergent property from the logic of market economies, right? It is not as if I'm saying that individuals consciously make this be the case, right? In fact, they don't want this to be the case. Nobody wants their profit rate to be equal to everybody else's. Nevertheless, they get equalized. And this is what I'm saying, right? The overall logic of market economies overrides the individual preferences. Even when the individual preferences do not align with the labor values, which many times they don't, right? Like, obviously they don't. This is why I'm saying that they're disturbing factors. In the short run, maybe a lot of people suddenly want to buy hot dogs for whatever reason, right? So the hot dog price is going to go up relative to its competitive level. But in the long run, as soon as other people notice that particular gap in the market, they will flow in there, right? And they will bring the price down, because if supply increases relative to demand, the price will go down, right? It's like very simple logic.
Right. So I'm not asserting that that I disagree with like equilibria or anything like that. I do agree that there are equilibria in markets. But what I'm contending here is that your theory of value doesn't ever account for the actual fundamental level of value, which is the particular. You're moving to the general before you've even solved the particular case. It's a hasty generalization, in my view.
It's because we do not need, like, for example, when biologists build models on population dynamics for other species, they don't need to like have a model for how every individual will behave, right? Because even within animals, they are heterogeneous, right? No single animal has the same exact needs and wants as every other, right? So when biologists talk about population dynamics, they build models on aggregate phenomena that emanate from the interaction of heterogeneous individuals. And this is what we do exactly, right? We of course accept that there are heterogeneous individuals and that they have their own psychological valuations of things. We just say, okay, if you put a bunch of these, like, even if you assume that they're like fully hyper rational and they like only want what is best for them, right? Like purely self-centered. Even if you assume that, we don't need to assume like some generosity or whatever. Like whatever model you want to build of human behavior, it is consistent with what I'm saying, right? Is that if you put a bunch of individuals that have this particular varying preferences, and you put them in this particular social context, that is the important thing, right? Because if you put them in a different social context, different phenomena will emerge. If you put them in a socialist economy, you won't expect the labor theory of value to apply, right? Because the state is going to determine the prices, not the right? No, it's not going to be an emergent phenomena from the exchange between individuals, right? And even if you want to assume like free voluntary exchange between equals, right? So nobody's like exchanging something that is like in an unequal manner. Like even if you want to assume like the best possible capitalist and the best possible market economy, the labor theory of value still applies. And this is the key insight of Marxist economics, which is we don't need to make evil characterization of capitalist economies in order to understand them. We can understand them exactly as they are and build our later analytical conclusions from that particular standing point.
So, on the case of biologists, where they're making general statements about populations, I agree that they are indeed generalizing there. But you're doing a different sort of activity. You're not making a correct generalization. The proper way to do like a biological study like that would be to first look at the particulars and then induce the general principles from those particulars. So you'd still have to account for the particulars. If the general statement contradicts the particular statement, it's not a correct general statement. And your general statement that the only thing which accounts for value is labor, that's not built up from inducting on a bunch of particulars, because in none of those particulars is it the case that somebody is valuing at the level of labor. Neither party ever is, right? Because there's the inequality necessarily in every trade.
Okay, very
Yep,
quickly
yep.
before you respond, Victor, my apologies. We're getting into the final 20 minutes of the open discussion. For those of you in the audience who would like to ask a question of either of our debaters, you can do so by sending a super chat with your question in it. They will be asked after the open discussion section is over in the order in which they arrive. If you would like to come on stream and challenge either of our debaters, join the Discord server and go into the waiting room channel. All right, as you were, my
Send a
apologies.
link to this. Can I like send the link to your Discord into my chat so that
Please
people
do.
could?
Yeah.
Yeah, you send it up in the DMs. Here we go.
I'll put one into my chat in case people can't find it in the description for whatever reason. That seems to be a thing people have difficulty with. All right, 21 minutes.
Do you want to continue on that line of discussion, or do you want to like?
Yeah, sure. So what I was going to reply is that we don't disagree on the basic premise that individuals have heterogeneous wants and needs and heterogeneous purposes, and that they have to value unequally at an individual level the commodities that they purchase in order to exchange to exist, right? I'm not denying that, right? What I'm saying is that starting from there, we can build a model that produces the labor theory of value. Right? So starting from that individual micro foundation, you can build a macro outcome that is consistent with the labor theory of value. And you haven't shown how that isn't the case.
Well, I'm saying you're using an incorrect theory of induction here, because your general principle that you're supposed to be getting to, it contradicts every single one of those particulars. That can never happen for any generalization.
Then
Like
how come profit rates get equalized? Nobody wants there to be an equalization of profit rates. Why do they get equalized?
I don't know about that phenomenon specifically.
I mean, this is a very common phenomenon. Like this is called arbitrage.
I don't know about.
This is called arbitrage.
And I would assume it's just standard going towards equilibrium stuff, which you can account for across the board on subjective theory.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly, and that is what I'm saying.
But my one then, so if you can account for it on subjective theory, and my one actually accounts for the particulars as well, clearly my one is the more scientific one, because I'm not making the hasty generalization.
No, right? So what I'm saying is that what we're trying to explain once again is the relative prices of commodities, right? And starting from individual valuations, right, you can build a simulation, for example, where the original prices are fully determined just by like idiosyncratic factors of individual preferences, which are not at equilibrium, right? Because you cannot expect original individual preferences to produce an equilibrium. What I'm saying is that starting from the ground of purely subjective idiosyncratic factors, if you assume a certain logic, the overall long run and aggregate outcome is going to be the labor theory of value. So of course, I'm going to agree with you that individuals have their subjective valuations, and this doesn't contradict my position. It's just one way of getting at my particular answer, right?
So, but my claim isn't that your thesis is ignoring individual preferences. In a way it is, right? But in a very specific way. It's saying that let's just say for the sake of argument that your labor theory of value would predict the exact same things on the macro level as the subjective theory of value. For this line of argument, at least, we can assume that. That still doesn't mean, then we would still have to decide, well, which one is the more scientific one? And that would be based on which one is actually correctly inducing from the particulars, because that's how science is done, right? If we're going to be empiricists about this, because I know, surprising to hear from an Austrian, but yes, I am an empiricist. If you look at the particular individuals, what you see, and you can get this just from the fact that there's free will, what you see is what value means for them is that they prefer something to something else. It's ordinal. They are making a choice here, and there is the inequality there. But if you have an inequality in every particular, you could never, through any valid generalization, get inequality. It couldn't ever work. So my theory is more scientific because it accounts for the general and the particular.
I'm sorry, like probably this is like the 50th time that I'm explaining this, but let me do it again. So, like, if you ask Marx, okay, why is it that two people exchange? He will tell you because they value those things unequally, right? He's not going to make the claim that they exactly want the labor theory of value to apply to be the case. Like, okay, because this took me this amount of effort, I'm only going to be able to take something that the other person cost the same amount to produce. No, people don't think like that. And Marx certainly didn't believe that they think like that. And no Marxist ever said that they believe those particular things. What we're claiming is that starting from the grounds of like free will, take whatever you want, the labor theory of value applies, right? It's that the aggregate patterns, the aggregate outcomes of the behavior of multiple individuals in a given society produce outcomes that override the individual preferences. As I was saying, nobody wants there to be equal profit rates, but through a turbulent equalization profits, they do get equalized, right? So we can understand the equalization of profit rates starting from like, okay, every individual wants to have more than what they already have, right? We can start from there, even though we don't need to start from there, but we can, okay? We can start from some other like micro model, and yet we can derive that particular outcome, right? And it is in this equilibrium where the labor theory of value emerges. And that's it. And if this were false and unscientific, the empirical evidence wouldn't corroborate our predictions, right? You also have to contend with the fact that all the empirical evidence gathered on the specific predictions of the labor theory of value that only the labor theory of value makes, these predictions have been consistently met by empirical success in many different countries across many different time periods.
Okay, so are you familiar with the visual concept of noise? Where just a whole array of like randomly colored pixels.
So are you talking about white noise in a econometrics kind of way, or?
No, I'm just for right now, I'm just taking it away and then I'll bring it back. Just white noise as in like the static you see, right? And if you have a bunch of like randomly colored pixels, if you zoom way out, it just kind of looks all gray, right? This looks like a gray sort of blob. So would it be a valid generalization to say the pixels in this image are gray? No, it wouldn't, because that doesn't like, maybe none of the pixels in the image are gray. It's just when you zoom way out, it all looks kind of like a grayish blob. So it would be an invalid generalization to say that the pixels are gray. You would have to account.
Yeah, and I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. Can you prove that I'm doing that? Can you show exactly how I'm doing that? Have you even read? Yes. Have you even read the papers that I sent you where we actually build the models starting from these foundations?
Because your thesis it isn't relevant. Like whether or not you can draw an empirical like sort of that, hey, my theory was able to predict in this market at this time, whatever. What I'm saying is that your theory that you're working on is a hasty generalization. No, hasty generalization.
But you haven't proven that. You're claiming that, but you haven't proven that.
A hasty generalization might sometimes make the same prediction as a proper generalization. And the proof that it's a hasty generalization is that your generalization, the general that you built up, the general rule, does not apply to any single one of the particulars that it's supposed to apply to.
No, and it's not supposed to apply to, right?
Yeah,
I'm saying
which
that
makes the
it is an
generalization.
emergent property. It is an emergent property. No single neuron in your brain contains consciousness. Nevertheless, consciousness emerges through the interaction of a multitude of neurons in your brain, right? This is what I'm saying. You cannot find consciousness in any given neuron. In fact, you cannot even claim that neurons want to produce consciousness, whatever that even means. But nevertheless, they do when they interact with each other in a given context. This is what I'm saying. If you assume a context and you assume heterogeneous individuals, you get the labor theory of value. This is what I'm saying. Like, you really haven't made any claim. Like, and obviously you can also talk about empirical evidence, but you haven't made also any criticisms of the empirical evidence. So to me, like, I just think that you honestly don't understand what I'm saying. This is what I think, honestly.
It seems like we're talking past each other on this point anyway. So I do have other questions.
But do you understand? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Do you understand that I'm not saying that consciousness emerges from any single individual neuron, right? I'm saying that consciousness emerges.
I could try and steelman what you're saying. What you're saying is that value is a thing which comes about only when you look at these aggregates.
Not right, only when you look at the aggregates. When you have multiple individuals interacting in a given social context, which is the market economy.
Yes, but that would be on the aggregate level, right?
Obviously, it applies on an aggregate level. It doesn't mean that at an individual level they want that aggregate outcome to occur. It just means that
I'm not saying anything about them wanting it. Like, I'm not saying anything about them wanting one theory value or another.
Yeah, but you're saying that in order for my claim not to be a generalization, a bad generalization, I should be theorizing that it applies to the individual level as well, because if it applies at the aggregate level, it must also at the individual level. I'm saying no. We can believe the two things at the same time.
So I'm saying that a good generalization in physics might be every action has an equal opposite reaction. Newton's laws, right? And that is true of every particular, and it's a general statement. That is a proper generalization. Your generalization is not a proper generalization. Because it doesn't apply to any of the particulars.
Do you believe that emergent properties exist? That they can exist?
Yes.
Well, in this case, this is what I'm describing. I'm describing an emergent
property. Then you're not even stating that this is a purely emergent property, though. Because you're stating that it does still occur on the individual level.
No. I'm saying that
it is only on the aggregate.
It occurs, yes, only on the aggregate. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I've been saying the amount of time.
Well, you contradicted yourself earlier, but we'll let that go because you are a Marxist.
So let me tell you. No. I haven't contradicted anything. I haven't contradicted anything. All the time.
Okay, hang on, Victor. Zulu, then Victor, please.
So just before I said, so it's only on the aggregate level then, and you said no. So I was like, okay, well then we'll apply that. So let's just take it that it is on your theory. Value is only on the aggregate level. Then what the hell even is value if it's completely detached from any individual?
It's not that it is completely detached, as I'm saying. It is an emergent property of interaction. Exactly, because emergent properties exist only in the aggregate, right? So, like, if before, I apologize, if before I gave you the wrong impression that I said that it doesn't apply at the aggregate level, I've always been claiming from my introduction itself that this is an emergent phenomena of capitalist economies, right? So that is why we talk about abstract socially necessary labor time, right? Any given worker laboring is not producing the outcome. It is the entire society through its own logic that produces this outcome. And this is why I can make a claim that is consistent with your micro foundation while still producing my macro outcome. And this is why you still haven't provided me any good reason as to believe that the labor theory of value is incorrect. You have made a false claim about a JST generalization, but that is just false, right? That is just false. I'm claiming that this is an emergent property in a very similar way to how consciousness is an emergent property of neurons in our brains. No single neuron contains consciousness. Nevertheless, consciousness emerges from the interaction of heterogeneous neurons, right? No single individual wants the labor theory of value to apply. No single individual is thinking, okay, so my labor is going to determine the exchange value of this particular commodity. Nobody's thinking that. Nevertheless, the outcome still appears. And we also see it at an empirical level, right? That's my point.
So, what sort of data type is value? You think it's a cardinal thing? Is it ordinal? Is it Boolean?
So in the way that I'm describing, it is indeed something that is cardinal, right? Because you can measure it on a continuous function. Why can you measure it on a continuous function? Because, as I'm saying, exchange is quantitative in nature, and the proportions get exchanged in numeric ways that you can quantify and that you can put in homogeneous functions, right? In continuous functions. And this is why we can model an economy through differential equations that produces a simulation of an economy that yields this particular result.
Okay, so if it's cardinal, is it a ratio or an interval measure? I can give examples of this too.
Yeah, so usually the way we measure this empirically, okay, is we take input-output tables, which give us the necessary data in order to estimate the labor values of commodities, right? I'm going to give you the basic way that we test the cross-sectional hypothesis, okay? I also said that there are different other hypotheses. I'm just going to focus on one for simplicity, okay? So we calculate the labor values, okay, through these input-output tables, which tell us the labor requirements for the production of commodities of industries, right? We vertically integrate them, meaning that we add all of the direct and indirect labor times required to produce a given commodity together. Okay, we produce these estimates of the labor values. We look at the market prices, okay, and we use, it's more complicated, right? Because then we produce estimates of the theoretical competitive prices, right? The direct prices and the prices of production, right? That reflect the equalization of profit rates, okay? But abstracting from that, what we look is basically, we take vector distance measures that look at the vector of market prices and then at the vector of labor values. In reality, it's the vector of direct prices and the vector of production prices, but you can just call them the vector of labor values. And we look at how close these things are to each other, right? So you can plot them on a graph. You can draw a 45-degree line, and if they were to be very close to each other, they would lie very close to the 45-degree line, right? That would mean that the x-axis and the y-axis is equal. So this is how we test whether the labor values are indeed the determinants of the prices.
So I want to be clear with what I'm asking here. So like a ratio measure, you might know this, but I just want to make it clear for the audience at the very least. Like what I mean by a ratio measure is something like Kelvin, where it's got an objective 0 point, absolute 0, and then you can go up or down from there. Obviously you can't for temperature, but for other things you could, right? Whereas an interval measure would be something like degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit, where there doesn't have an objective 0 point, it's an arbitrarily chosen 0. So would value be a ratio or an interval measure? Does it have an objective 0 value? But like, what is that? Or is there none?
So there are potentially different ways of measuring this, but usually it's an interval, right? So usually these things, you just calculate the amount of direct and indirect labor time that is required to produce any given commodity, and that just lies on a scale that doesn't have a reference point, if that is what you're asking.
Okay, so if it's an interval measure, what is the arbitrarily chosen 0?
So, I mean, do you mean to say like what would be like the minimum?
Gentlemen, last 5 minutes, just a heads up.
Reference?
I'm saying that
I'm just saying that what we do is we calculate these labor values, and these labor values are then put into a vector that then is used to measure their distance with respect to the market prices. Like, what do you think? Market prices have a point of reference, or do they not have a point of reference? Are they, as you were saying, ratio, or are they interval?
Yeah, so I think the value is ordinal, so I don't even think it's cardinal. But you're saying that it's cardinal, and the type of cardinal it is an interval measure. And what makes it an interval measure as against a ratio measure is it has an arbitrarily chosen 0 point. So what is the arbitrarily chosen 0 point for value?
Oh, sorry. I meant to say that there's no arbitrary. There's no point of reference.
Okay, so it's if it's not interval, then it's a ratio measure.
Yeah.
Then
Sorry, I misspoke there.
Okay, so what is zero value? If value is this emergent phenomenon which only exists on the entire market level, what does zero value mean?
Zero value would just mean something that doesn't require any labor time to be produced. Right?
Okay, so
something that is not valuable is something that is not socially demanded, and it doesn't therefore require any amount of labor time to be produced.
Okay, so let's think about this, because it is possible for individual preferences to demand anything, right? Like I could want anything.
Yeah.
I could want something that didn't, whatever, right? So what if everybody wanted this thing just randomly?
Yeah, suddenly there will be a distortionary effect where a big increase in demand for that particular good will certainly raise the price for that good temporarily, until through the equalization force that I described earlier, there is an equilibrium reached where, again, the labor values are the determinants of the relative prices.
Right, but so then somebody in my chat gave a good example. Like, what if I was just walking along? Have you seen Blood Diamond? Great movie. Some guy just, there's a big fat diamond in the ground he finds. Maybe I'm just walking along one day, along the Zambezi or whatever, and I see a big fat diamond on the ground. Nobody's produced it. No labor time has gone into it yet. Is that valueless?
Yeah, so if you consider it isolated from society, it is valueless, right? It doesn't have any value because you need to assume a given social context in order for it to be valuable, right? Now, let's say that you take it to society and you sell it. It will be valued at the market established value for that particular piece of diamond, right? Even though it didn't require you any labor to produce, in society, diamonds are very expensive to produce. So if you suddenly put a diamond there, it's going to have a very marginal effect on supply, and therefore the price is still going to be determined by the labor value, right? Because the effect is going to be minimal. Now, I understand what you're trying to say, right? I can sell something that didn't require me any labor to produce for a bunch of money if I can find somebody that is willing to pay a big amount of money for it. And I'm going to agree with you on that, right? That is something that can happen. But if suddenly a bunch of, like in market economies, if somebody sees that you can do that, they are also going to want to do that.
Last minute.
And then they're going to flood that market, and the labor theory value is going to arise, right? So yeah, at an individual level, again, you can find an example where somebody finds a diamond. Oh my God, look how lucky I am. And they sell it for thousands of dollars when it didn't require any labor for them to produce. But that doesn't mean that diamonds in the market are actually going to be valued at the labor time that it required you to produce. It's going to be the socially necessary labor time, right? That is why we talk about socially necessary labor time.
All right, we are out of time. We're out of time, unfortunately. I'm going to give you both 3 minutes to make a closing statement. I think it was Liquidzulu who went first. So, Victor, do you want to do your closing statement first, and Liquidzulu will close?
Sure, yeah, I think it's...
Did I call you Victor or Liquid? Sorry, Victor, you go first.
Yeah, I think it's totally fair. So let me just put my timer. It's 3 minutes, right?
3 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so we want to explain with a theory of value what is the quantitative worth of commodities. The labor theory of value produces a internally consistent argument that is mathematically viable, and we can see through simulations how market economies produce this outcome. And we have also found a lot of empirical evidence that corroborates the hypotheses that are drawn from this particular theory of value, right? So we're trying to explain the quantitative worth of commodities. The labor theory of value is very good at doing it, and it's also empirically sound. The subjective theory of value, however, doesn't meet the criteria necessary to have a substance of value, because preferences, again, they are not universal. They are not homogeneous, they cannot be quantified, and they can also not be considered to be social substances, right? Even though they are influenced by society. So therefore, they belong to a different category to exchange values, which is what we're trying to explain. If you want to see this practically, again, you can find a very simple exchange, right? Two individuals make an exchange between equals, so they exchange commodities that are both worth $10. The commodities were worth $10 before the exchange, they're worth $10 after the exchange, but the utilities were unequal, right? So one thing cannot explain the other. What remained constant between the beginning of the exchange and after the exchange? The abstract socially necessary labor time required to produce those commodities, right? At an individual level, isolated from society, this theory doesn't make any sense. The labor theory value doesn't make any sense. But if you consider a society, right, a market economy, whether it is capitalist or simple production, if you consider an actual society with heterogeneous individuals, we're not making any wild assumptions about people being like overly altruistic or wanting to have an outcome that is consistent with the labor theory of value. We're not making that assumption, right? We're saying people act on an economically rational way, and in the given context of market economies, the labor theory of value simply emerges, and it is an unescapable phenomenon, which is why neoclassical economists, even though they want to avoid cost theory of value, they ultimately are led to one, right? Where they say that in the long run, the prices of commodities are going to be determined by the average cost, by the minimum point of the average cost curve, which is a similar but very, very worst comparative, if you compare them, a much worse argument compared to the labor theory of value, which is far more realistic and produces a more consistent result. That's it.
Done. Great. Okay. Zulu, please. 3 minutes.
Sure. So I think the labor theory of value, as presented in this debate, is not a scientific theory. It cannot account for value as you yourself, everybody watching, can actually introspect value to be. Because, on Victor's own terms, it is not even caring about the individuals. It doesn't care about the individual humans. They're irrelevant in his economics, which his economics is supposed to be studying humans. So, for the Marxist, across the board, in politics, in metaphysics, even in economics, the collective is all that matters. But the collective, that's a universal, that's a concept. The concept is not the thing that actually exists, though. The thing that actually exists are the individual particulars. Any theory of value must be able to account for the particulars, first of all, and be built up from these particular observations that you see of these individuals. You see, when you look out there, or you look to yourself, that individuals always, in every single trade ever that has ever happened, voluntary trades that is, they value what they're getting more than what they're giving up. If you have in every single particular an inequality, no generalization which is correct could ever smooth this out into being an equality in every trade. What you actually have, the correct generalization, is that there's mutual profit in any given exchange, right? That accounts for the fact that there's always this inequality going on. This sort of ignorance, ignoring that is, of individual actors and their own free will and the entire basis of why we have economies and dogs don't, is seen very heavily in how they do their economics. They go, oh, we'll do a bunch of mathematics on all this data, which has been completely divorced from the actual people who are doing the acting. And we'll integrate over it all. You can't do calculus on people. It doesn't work. These are individual actions, and the value attached to those actions, the value attached to those goals, has to be ordinal. You can never have an equality. You can't have indifference. And this is all, of course, based on the fact that their philosophy is completely bunk. It's built on contradiction. It's not built on science. Science, in the proper sense, has to be Aristotelian. And that's me done there.
All right, brilliant. Okay, we're going to bring in, I don't see any super chat questions, so we're going to bring in guests. If you would like to ask a question, you can still super chat one, and I will ask that in between guests. But first we have, in the order in which they've arrived, if you want to call in to talk to one of our guests and challenge them, join the Discord server. There's a link in the description. I've also put in the chat, and go into the waiting room. First we have Thoughtbat. Welcome. You're muted, by the way.
Hello. Let me just down.
Okay, and how we're going to do this
Lovely.
very quickly, I'm going to limit it to 10 minutes per guest, otherwise this can take forever. So this interaction can last for 10 minutes. Begin, please.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, Victor. I think throughout the whole debate, I didn't really see a definition of value. It might have happened earlier on, but I define value as an affinity to act in order to attain a given experience or a given end. So that means we're referring to an individual being's affinity towards acting. So for me, value then is going to be necessarily subjective. It's always mind dependent. It's dependent on a conscious mind. It seems like what labor theory of value is trying to do is abstracting away from individuals, a collection of individuals, and create some kind of objective value. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but I'm just wondering how, if value is ultimately going to be mind dependent, it's going to be subjective. Even if you're extrapolating from, even if you're abstracting and generalizing, that resultant value is still going to be mind dependent. So you still have a subjective value. Now, that can explain market value or exchange value. But I don't see how necessarily that labor is the necessary thing, or the only thing that produces exchange value, or from which exchange value is derived. Because there's so many examples where that clearly isn't the case. The diamond theory that Zulu brought up, sex work, etc. These are counterexamples to the labor theory of value producing market value based on labor hours put into the thing. It seems to me that labor is associated with cost. Like, most people don't like working; they want to shorten their work hours because they'd rather do something else. That's generally the case. Some people might like labor, and I think labor theory of value is more absorbed into the subjective theory. So a lot of us don't like labor. We'd rather not do labor. And so that's where you get your correlations between more labor hours and higher prices for that labor. But the marginal cases seem to shift me towards a subjective side. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So maybe you weren't in the introduction. So the first thing that I actually set out to do in my introduction was to define what we are trying to answer with a theory of value, right? And my basic contention is that a theory of value is trying to answer what is the immanent measure of the quantitative worth of commodities, right? And we derive the labor theory of value from a very simple chain of logic, right? Which is, in market economies, exchange is generalized. So everything is up for sale, right? So any commodity can be exchanged potentially, theoretically, for any other commodity in different varying proportions, obviously, right? The next premise is that exchange is quantitative and measurable, right? Because, as I was saying, these proportions are numeric. They can be measured in numbers, in dollars, for example. You can measure them. And they are quantitative, so they can be stored in data sets, right? And this is what we do as economists. And the next thing is that this is a social process. So your point about subjectivity, it is correct that the labor theory of value is contingent on a subjective starting point, which is the starting point of market economies, which is subjective, right? Because market economists do not exist independent of human minds. Only humans so far have been able to develop highly developed market economies. And this is a property that is subjective in the sense that it doesn't appear in nature like everywhere. It's just like human dependent, right? It's human mind dependent. Although I can imagine other species also developing this type of societies if they ever were to find some kind of a societal structure that meets the criteria, right? So again, exchange is generalized. It is quantitative and measurable. and it is a social process. So then my question is, what is the only thing that is universal across commodities? So it is generalized, it is quantifiable and measurable, and it is a social process, it is a social substance, and this is abstract, socially necessary labor time. Now, we can build simulations of market economies through algebraic and models that also employ differential equations, and we can see that this line of reasoning, which is, again, it's an argument, right? So it can be sound or it cannot. But if we establish a market economy, a theoretical market economy with these preconditions, right? A competitive market economy in particular, we can find this result in every simulation that we can think of, right? Assuming, obviously, realistic assumptions about the production capabilities of a society, right? About competition, etc. So this is my idea, right? And the idea of the labor theory of value is that it's going to be an emergent property of market economies that is going to happen at a macro level, and it is going to happen through time. That is why we produce three hypotheses: a cross-sectional hypothesis, a time series hypothesis, and a structural hypothesis. And the structural and the time series both involve time series data, right? So we can look at it either at a cross-sectional level or at a time series level, and we can see in the data that actual capitalist economies also match our predictions. So I don't know if I answered all of your questions with this, or maybe you had something else.
Yeah, so you mentioned the word universal there. You said, what is the universal thing across all these instances of exchanges which produce their market value?
Yeah.
But it's not universal though, is it? Because again, we can bring up these marginal cases. If I go back to Zulu's red fat diamond, and then I say, well, what if he found 2 red fat diamonds and didn't have to use labor to get them? What if he found 3, 4, 5, 100,000? Just found them in the ground. I mean, I know you mentioned realistic, but it's logically possible.
Yeah.
In that situation, we'd expect the price of these diamonds to go down because its supply has certainly increased. Diamonds are valuable because of their rarity. That's mainly because of their rarity, and mainly because they're pretty. If these diamonds were not rare at all, and they were dirty, and that they just didn't look nice, I strongly doubt that they'd have their same value on the market. And it seems to me that and even if like the labor, the abstract necessarily required labor to be put into extracting those diamonds and bringing them to market was the same, we would expect that price to go down, given those factors, supply and how the diamond looks. Would that not be a counter example to this idea of a universal factor here?
No. So the reason why not is because even if you just have to pick the diamond from the floor in order to be able to take it to the market, that is still requiring labor, right? So transportation is a form of labor. Actually, in the United States, it's a big form of labor, right? Because there's a big industry in transportation, because you have a very big country with a lot of land that needs to be traveled across. And it is by no means just effortless, right? Human labor is involved in every social activity that you can imagine, because every social activity involves humans doing things, right? So it's inevitable that you're going to lead to the conclusion that human beings doing things is a universal across all production activities and across all exchange activities, right? So then there is a different question, right? First is the question of universality. Then is the question of, okay, is labor then going to determine the prices of these commodities, right? Here, when you talked about diamonds being nice and pretty and whatnot, the main point that I think you're trying to get at is the point of scarcity, right? Diamonds are scarce, they are difficult to obtain, and this is why they are expensive in the market. I agree with you on that, right? Scarcity is a factor that is employed in the labor theory of value as well, but we do not see it as a binary, right, where things are either reproducible or they are not reproducible, they are either scarce or not. We look at it as a gradient, right, where things are more or less reproducible, more or less scarce. And at aggregate level, usually things are reproducible, right? So even if you can find one particular painting painted by, let's say, Dali, for example, right, which is irreproducible, that doesn't mean that the market for paintings doesn't produce paintings that are not reproducible, right? And even that particular painting itself can be reproduced, even though it's not going to be the same, right? Maybe you cannot have an actual original Dali in your home, but you can have a replica of a Dali in your home, right? So things are in a gradient of replicability, and this gradient of replicability is going to determine the extent to which the law of value applies to that particular form of commodity, right? Things that are more replicable are going to be more subject to the laws of competition and are therefore going to be more subject to the labor theory of value. Things that are less replicable are going to go in the opposite direction, right? But we can explain this with the labor theory of value as well.
All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thoughtbath, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you to Thoughtbath. Some
No,
interesting points.
he just right and left, didn't he? All right. Evolutionary capitalist. Welcome. You're muted, by the way. Hello, hello. Evolutionary capitalist, you are live and you are muted. Just a heads up.
This one will be interesting.
Will it?
Yeah.
Evolutionary capitalist, you are on stream, but your mic is muted.
Maybe he went to the bathroom or something.
Maybe. All right, we're gonna bring on the next person.
We can try to go, yeah.
Yeah, we'll bring on the next person. We'll bring on. I actually can't see your whole name here. This is. Who are you?
I was gonna see. That's an M.
Oh, it's because I got streamer mode on. God damn it! Hang on. This is Mandy Moorhall. You are live. Welcome. You have 10 minutes.
Can you guys hear me? I'm driving. Sorry, I wasn't driving when I started the stream. Can you hear me now?
Hopefully you're still driving by the time the stream ends. How are you?
Yeah, for real. Hey, Sunday, thanks for having me. First time, long time. I want to ask. I want to, I guess, start by making a couple observations. Is that there's this old Hegel quote where he says, "The towel of Minerva flies at dusk," right? Which basically means that philosophy philosophizes after the fact. And what one of your guests here is doing is basically saying that, like, economics measures things after the exchange and all of that has already happened. And then your other guest is basically saying that if I wish really, 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 really hard, the ideas that exist inside my head may affect the market in the future. And if I let people know really, 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 really hard that the ideas inside my head don't equate with the price that is on the price tag, maybe the person that's at that market will be very, very, very nice and barter with me. I own a business, and I don't really care about the ideas that are inside of your head. I've already done the valuation after the fact to set the price for my product. So Zulu can have all of the magical ideas inside of his head all he wants, and unless he puts his money where his mouth is, I don't care, and he can get the hell out of my store. Basically, that's all I wanted to say, and I'll take my answer off the air. Thanks.
Well, to be clear, that is the exact prediction made by the subjective theory of value. That's what the subjective theory of value says. If you own a business, you can sell for whatever the hell you think it's worth, whatever price you think, where you'd prefer that amount of money to what you're giving up. That's exactly what I'm saying. It's not my mind controls reality and can control what the market prices will be. It's that the market prices come about in exactly the way Mr. Minerva or whatever it was decides them to be, right? I gotta trade with them. There gotta be a double coincidence of once. The inequality. This is exactly what I was talking about.
Can I give an answer also to that question? Because I think it's a really good one.
Sure.
Very quickly. So this is actually a very interesting thing, because usually in neoclassical economics, in perfect competitions, firms are taken to be price takers. Both consumers and firms are price takers, right? Which raises a paradox, which is, if everybody is a price taker, who sets the prices, right? It's like a really stupid paradox, but like it gets to something very fundamental, which is something that Marx already pointed out, which is that obviously it is obvious that the producers, the sellers are going to be the ones that determine the price, at least the price that they're going to sell at originally. That doesn't mean that they can sell at whatever price they want, because again, like in evolution, there's going to be a natural selection that selects only the sellers that sell at competitive levels of prices or at nearby levels, right? So yes, it is very realistic to start your model of economics with the assumption that it is firms that set prices rather than just being like price takers, as in neoclassical economics. But that is not really I believe this is not a good criticism of the Austrian theory of value, because in the Austrian theory of value, it's not that the sellers are price takers, as in neoclassical economics, right? They do actually accept that everybody has their own, let's say, like reservation price or their own preference scales, and that is exactly what is going to be what they use in their judgment of what they're going to sell at. But it's realistic, obviously, to start from the starting point of, yes, as a seller, I am going to determine the price, and then the market is going to decide whether my price is a good one or not. Right? That's it.
Thank you, Victor. I'm going to bring in Evolutionary Capitalist now. Hopefully he's around. Evolutionary Capitalist, welcome. Hello?
Yo.
Yo.
Am I live?
You're alive. All right, you got 10 minutes. Ask your question.
Okay, so I have my own value theory just to refute the subjective theory of value, or the Mises interpretation of the subjective theory of value, which I think is ridiculous. Right, value is ultimately derived from general evolution's goal, right? And general evolution just wants us to maximize production. So that's where all value and ultimately prices are derived. Evolution gave us capitalism and the price system in order to allocate resources to maximize production. This is where the value of a strategy comes from, right? It's not subjective. It's not created by the mind. It's not determined by labor inputs, right? So I think the Mises interpretation, or the modern Austrian school interpretation of the subjective theory of value, and Marx's interpretation of the labor theory of value are both agenda driven. They both start from a conclusion that they want to argue for, that they want to reach. In the subjective theory of values case, it's laissez-faire economics. And I think in Marx's labor theory of value, they want to argue for the exploitation of the worker. I think these are both dishonest value theories. They don't pursue truth. They were made to convince others into believing their silly rhetoric.
And frankly, I think both of my guests should be ashamed of themselves.
Value is ultimately objective, but it isn't determined by labor inputs, right?
So, Liquid, do you want to go first, or can I answer first? I'm gonna be very quick on my thing.
Well, I just wanted to know what it means for general evolution to have a goal, and why that goal would be to maximize production. I don't know what that means.
I think there's enough empirical evidence to see that it's working towards something. We didn't emerge spontaneously or through a random process. I mean, ultimately it was random, but the selection process isn't random. It's ultimately trying to create a being that can efficiently use energy, right, in order to perpetuate itself. A complex being.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's obvious, of course. Yeah.
I mean, you can look at the evidence, and you can deduce this through evolutionary game theory, which philosophers and Austrian economics are just oblivious to because they're using the outdated, never used praxeology, right? You can deduce its goal through what I call general evolutionary stable strategy, right? So behavior. So ultimately, you can put value into its proper perspective using game theory, not praxeology. You can look at what's called payoff of a game and look at the objectiveness of that. What we're doing as actors, or whether we're a consumer or producer, is try to predict consequences and seeing how that affects overall productivity. And this is where our perceptions may deviate from objective value. And this is where natural selection comes into play and corrects our deviation proportional to the magnitude of that deviation. Right. So this is why you see producers go out of business. This is why you see consumers make grave errors, like the tourists on the Titan sub, right? They improperly valued that tour, and evolution tuned them out. It decreased the demand for that tour, or even all tours of the Titanic. And so you can see the consequences constantly shape all our preferences.
Well, I don't think people stopped going on the that particular tour because demand dived. I think they stopped going on that tour because the sub exploded.
Yes.
Okay.
And so that consequence altered future demand, right?
I guess you could say that.
I do think Victor should have his say,
Victor,
though, 'cause
please.
I have had a full debate with this guy.
Yeah, so the first thing is that you claim that both the labor theory of value and the subjective theory of value are motivated by political purposes. I don't think this is accurate, at least for the labor theory of value, because the labor theory of value originally was developed by the classical economists, which were defenders of some kind of laissez-faire capitalism, right? So David Ricardo and Adam Smith, you cannot really judge them as socialists, if you want to put it like that. And nevertheless, they believed and they developed the labor theory of value, right? And the second thing is that, yeah. Do you want to answer?
Yeah. So my accusations aren't levied to the originators of each of the theories, right? So I do think the classical school, Ricardo and Adam Smith, were honest in their attempt to describe prices, or to try to determine the ultimate determinants of price. The same thing can be said for Menger, right? I'm not accusing those people. I'm accusing both the advent of the Mises interpretation of Menger's theory and Marx's interpretation of the classical school's labor theory of value. That's where I start the allegations.
So Marx didn't actually make like an interpretation. He took the claims of the classical economists and he just developed them analytically further, right? So his theory is just a progression, a natural progression from the classical economists. In fact, classical economists like Adam Smith were very had some certain socialist leanings, right? Like when Adam Smith was saying all the time that you shouldn't take the whatever the landlords and whatever the capitalists were saying at face value, right? Because they have their own particular interests and they may not align with those of society and whatnot. So like Marx was just developing that and saying, yes, if we take your starting point and we just develop it a little bit further, we get to the theory of exploitation, right? And then the next thing is that the labor theory of value already incorporates a dynamic interaction between subjective preferences and objective determinants of value, right? So I think that the labor theory of value already incorporates this dynamic process that you wanted to incorporate in your own theory.
I think your value theory does incorporate more of my theory than the Austrian school. So what's your refutation to my allegations, Zulu? Because I primarily created my value theory just to refute the silliness of the Austrian school, that values ultimately derive from the mind, right? We know that the mind is imperfect and we only perceive objective value.
Yeah, so I suppose my response to it would be, this is so obviously nonsense and like schizophrenic ramblings. I mean, where even to begin? Evolution doesn't have a goal. Evolution can't have a goal. Evolution isn't an entity which has free will and can choose things. So just on all counts, no, it doesn't have a goal. The reason why certain things evolve
is the natural selection process a form of choosing?
No, natural selection is not a form of choosing in the volitional sense, bro. It is certain genes die out, so those genes do not perpetrate further. This is the elementary what Darwin gave us, right? This is
for a guy general evolution too, not
for a guy who
biological.
loves evolution so much. You gotta read like Darwin a little more, I think.
Evolution, the natural selection process determines how behavior converges in any population, whether it be humans or any other animal, or whether it be AI or maybe a future robot that can act.
Sure, bad strategies die out. That's irrelevant. It applies to memes as well.
This is where I
meme
claim values derive from.
was like Dawkins came up with meme as an analogy to genes. Like, yeah, bad memes die out. But that doesn't mean that there's a goal, right? It's natural selection. It's not choosing. There isn't a fucking being called evolution which decides.
Well, I mean, there is, though. He's even a general, as a matter of fact.
I don't think there's like some entity called evolution which decides things in order to create a perfectly evolutionary being, like evolutionary capitalist seems to suggest. Like, I think that's nonsense.
So you think there's nothing outside of the mind that's... So this is what the Austrian school tries to...
So the Austrian 1 minute, by the way. I'll let you do a minute closer if you like afterwards. But
so the silly claim that the Austrian school makes is that the only thing that determines value is the mind, right? But everyone knows that preferences of both the consumer and producer are only proximal causes to supply and demand, right? What we're after is the ultimate causes of supply and demand. And again, I think my claim that all preferences come from evolution, like we don't really have that much free will. All our ultimate desires are programmed into us by evolution, and it's continually being refined. Right? You don't choose.
How do you know that evolution didn't just program an incorrect belief into you? How do you know that your belief is correct?
No, of course. Again, it's an imperfect programming. It's an unfinished programming that's continually being refined, and it's converging. What's that?
How do you even know that that's correct? It was just
both through evidence, and I can deduce it through game theory. We can look at convergence.
How do you know that you're using the correct standard of evidence? Right? If you're just predetermined to accept whatever evidence you will, how do you even know that it's accurate evidence? How do you know that a demon isn't deceiving you? What if the perfectly evolutionary being is Descartes' demon?
I don't, but there's no, I don't see, that may be a value to consider later, but at the moment, we just assume we can trust our senses. I don't see any value to it. What's that?
If you're consistent, you'd be a total skeptic.
If I'm what?
If you were consistent, you'd be a total skeptic, right down to the level of, does knowledge even exist?
No. I use Bayesian inference to.
How do you know that Bayes is correct? You don't. It was just programmed into
because from my senses it produces the best predictions and best.
How do you know your senses aren't lying to you? Like the demon might be deceiving you, bro.
What use is that? So let's explore that possibility.
The perfect evolutionary demon.
My senses are deceiving me now. What?
All right, gentlemen. Since I let you go for an extra minute, I'm actually going to recommend a couple of books for you, Evolutionary Capitalist. There's a thesis that Liquidzulu's, I don't know if he's referencing any of this directly, but if you look at people like Nietzsche and like Bergson or even Kant, one of the major threads that unites them is observing that whatever gives rise to our perception of reality and how we cognize it, that's going to be geared primarily towards action particular to humans and not necessarily towards things like metaphysical truth. And so there's potentially an additional layer of complexity that you may not be engaging with. I'd recommend giving those things a look. Anyways, thank you for coming on.
No to philosophy.
Say again? I didn't catch that.
Oh, just say no to philosophy.
There you go. That's the spirit. All right. Bedols, welcome. You're muted, by the way. Bedols, you are live. Ask your question.
Like ask some unrelated questions to Zulu. Sure. Okay. So, can you make a video about Kant, right? And like a proper video on how, his ideas ended up birthing Hitler's ideology and like the evil that you had mentioned some in your previous videos, right? Which are the more Discord voice call format. especially since I mean, apparently Mises was also influenced by Kant's epistemology, right? There's an article on Mises.org about that.
Yeah, my plan is definitely to make a full proper video on Kant at some point. And in fact, I presume you're referencing the tick video.
Yeah.
And my next video is going to be is going to at least include a response to that tick video. It's gotten spiraled out of control as per usual, and it's going to cover a whole lot more. But one of the things I'm doing in there is responding to tick.
By the way,
Which, by
you
the way,
also
I like Tick very much. He's a great guy.
yeah, it's true. You also, I think, wrote at least like 2 PDF articles on anarcho-capitalism. One on law, right, and the other on like, fuck, I forgot. But can you put those somewhere on your site? Because
All
I think
right.
that
Is there a question? Is there a question pertaining to the debate here?
Nah, it's just that.
All right. Take it easy.
Like I was just asking for that.
Yeah, you can
All right, see ya.
chat with him on his channel. It's okay. Sorry.
I will be putting those on my website. Yes.
Okay. Great. Mercs, welcome.
Hello.
Hello. You got 10 minutes. Ask your question. Mercs? Still with us? Mercs?
Hello. I think Victor mentioned before hello. I think Victor mentioned before that there was a scarcity. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry.
I think he's on a big delay.
Sounds
I
like
think so.
That was immediate.
Something's weird.
I've got no clue.
Just continue,
Okay, yeah.
please.
I heard Victor had. Now I hear myself. What's going on?
No one else can hear an echo. You're good.
Close the stream. Close the stream. Just listen on Discord.
Sorry, I'll fix this myself. Should be fine now. Victor had a point where he said scarcity was included in the labor theory of value, and I wanted to tie that into how that relates to the subjective theory of value, in terms of how the demand completely fluctuates despite the labor being put into it or not.
So what is the question? How do we account for a scarcity or for fluctuations in demand?
I think the example that was brought up was some random person finding a diamond. I remember reading about a slave who found a diamond that was worth like 3 million pounds, equivalent to our modern day. And all the effort that was taken into doing that was finding it and selling it off.
Yeah, so usually the diamond question is a very simple one to answer, right? From the labor theory of value, which is one particular diamond you can find, probably you that diamond came from somewhere and somebody had to like dig it up from the floor in a very effortful manner in order to achieve it. But okay, let's just imagine that the diamond just appeared to be there because it came from the sky or whatever. Again, isolated from society, that diamond is worth nothing in the sense that you need society for it to be worth something. So when you take it to society, you will see, oh my God, it's worth $3 million or whatever, right? Wow, it's really expensive, and even though it didn't take me anything to produce, right? But that is because you are taking that diamond into an existing market that has already been under the influence of the law of value. So you're benefiting from the prior existence of these particular laws in order to sell at a much higher price than what it would have been justified by the amount of effort that it took you, right? So usually in the market for diamonds, it is very expensive to obtain a diamond. Right? It is very expensive to dig it up and whatnot, to get it to the right shape and form and all of that. So that is why usually diamonds are expensive. It's also because they are relatively scarce, right? But nevertheless, they're still like relatively reproducible. That is why I say that reproducibility exists on a gradient, not on a binary, right? So every commodity, so far as they exist in this gradient, they have a tendency toward the labor theory of value. For some commodities, it's going to be greater, for some, it's going to be lower. And in the empirical data, we see consistently that throughout all economic industries, this theory applies. So one particular case of a diamond that was effortlessly achieved, even though there was still labor put into it, but one particular case is not going to override the logic of the system.
Right. And this theory obviously is being accomplished off of the pre-established market already being there. But regardless of that, if you're working on this gradient and you have competing minds, all socially, democratically owned, working tirelessly to mine coal or to search for diamonds, all of the effort being accumulated compared to another passerby just finding a diamond on the floor would have no impact to that?
It could impact the market. Let's say, for example, that suddenly diamonds start raining from the sky, right? Like, wow. So producing diamonds becomes really, yeah, that would actually hurt. But imagine that it does it in a harmless way. So that would actually produce an oversupply of diamonds in the market, which will bring the price down. And throughout time, okay, as I was saying, at an aggregate level, a new equilibrium will be reached, and it is a new equilibrium where the competitively determined price of diamonds is going to be lower than it was before, because now supply is more abundant, because they are simply more reproducible because they just rain from the sky, right? Like rain, like actual water, for example. Right?
Well, sure, but the scarcity, obviously, in that example is being inflated across the entire world, where normally either someone would be hoarding it, like it currently is being, or these random passerbys finding diamonds would not have access to raining diamonds across the sky. They'd more have access to a rare circumstance where they would be able to claim a diamond from nature for little to no effort and take advantage of everybody else's labor that's setting the prices.
In that case, what they will be doing is they will be just finding a way to cheat the market, right? Investors do this all the time, but it is a short-run phenomenon, right? As soon as you talk about the long run, about the impact of this on the economy as a whole and throughout time, you will see that it's going to be overridden, right? So throughout a short period of time, maybe these people that have been able to hoard these effortless diamonds, they will be obtaining higher than average profits, and because nobody can enter into their industry because they have hoarded all of them, they will just be like earning higher than average profits on a consistent basis, and they're going to cheat the market, right? But I mean, this is something that can occur and has occurred in practice, but it doesn't deny that the underlying tendency of market economies is to produce an equilibrium where the labor values are the ones that determine the prices.
Hey, yo, shout out to my market cheats out there. Woo!
Cheating the market from finding a random diamond. When you say cheat, it sort of points towards as if someone should be punished for finding a diamond on the floor.
No, it's not like they should be punished or anything. They're just going to benefit from the fact that they are entering into a market that has an established competitive price, which is far higher than what it costs them to produce, right? So their profits are going to be their profit margins are going to be great. They're going to be amazing. Now, if their diamonds could be accessed by other investors, then you would see an arbitrage process by which the prices of those diamonds will go down. But if they cannot, for monopoly reasons, then they will stay like that, right? But that is like what we want to understand is the underlying, the emergent phenomena. And then we have disturbing factors, which we also analyze in economics, right? Like monopoly power, like monopsony power, oligopolies, all of that. But Yeah, I mean, those are disturbing factors. They do not deny the underlying tendencies.
I see.
Anything else?
No, that's good. That's
All right.
all the questions I had.
Thanks for coming on. Have a good day. All right. Penultimate guest, Cretulatum. Welcome. Ask your question. You have 10 minutes.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So I have a question for Victor as well. So let's say I produce like a table that's not of very high quality, and I just because I put a lot of effort into it doesn't necessarily mean that the like table is worth that much, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're competing in a market where tables have a much greater quality, right? So your product is going to be just going to be on the lower end of the distribution. It's not going to affect the distribution. It's just going to be one little point more in a distribution of tables.
Okay. I mean, that was pretty much I missed most of the debate because I joined the stream late. So, yeah. Have a good one, guys. Bye.
Bye. Okay. Last guest. Jonas, welcome. You have 10 minutes. Ask your question. And you are muted, by the way.
Oh, shit. Hello.
So it's been every guest so far.
Yes. I was gonna ask,
You're blasting. I'm going to lower your volume a little bit.
oh, I'm sorry.
You should be. All right, go on.
Yes, how would you, well, this is for Victor. Essentially, how would you determine how effective any labor is, or any laborer? And would you need to in order to determine value?
So you mean to say how efficient they are?
Yes, how would you, using the labor theory of value, how would anyone be able to calculate how efficient any worker is, or if he's slacking or anything like that?
All right, so usually the labor efficiency, labor productivity, and the working day for laborers is a historically and socially determined thing that is usually determined through class struggle, right? In the past, workers used to work far greater working days than they do today, at least in developed Western countries. Their wages are also higher, and they have better living standards in general than in the Industrial Revolution, for example, right? So this is historically and context dependent. But if we want to establish like a purely objective measure of productivity, say productivity, for example, it is as simple as calculating the amount of goods that they produce within a given time period, let's say an hour, right? That is how you calculate the productivity of labor, right? Usually at a macro level, this is calculated for a year. So you calculate the amount of goods that they produce in 1 year, you divide it by that particular year, and you get their productivity. Now, they can actually work more efficiently, right? Because in the labor theory of value, we have established this distinction between relative and absolute surplus value extraction, right? You can increase the amount of profits that you earn from your laborers by either increasing the working day, so like the objective factors of like the working day, the intensity, but you can also do it in a relative manner by developing machinery that allows them to produce more in less time, right? So there are different ways of accounting for efficiency in market economies, well, in capitalist economies in particular, according to our theory, and these are usually very well conceptualized within the dichotomy of relative and absolute surplus value.
Okay, but if you're doing this, what you're doing is you're taking the averages and you're really putting the average of what a laborer could do in order to determine value. So wouldn't that make it not objective?
Can you repeat your question?
If you're using labor productivity on a complete average with all the workers,
Yeah.
Wouldn't the labor theory of value not be entirely objective? Wouldn't it be like drawn upon by? I don't really know what I'm saying.
So let me try to anticipate two potential lines of argumentation from your observation. So the first would be that obviously the labor theory of value is not purely objective in the sense that it doesn't describe a physical process that occurs from the laws of physics, for example. It's describing a social process. Right? And this is why value itself is a social substance. And this is why we don't talk about individual labor times, we talk about abstract socially necessary labor times, which is an aggregate of the individual labor times, right? So yes, it is not fully objective in that sense, and you do measure it by aggregating heterogeneous labors.
All right. Thank
By the
you.
way, Jonas, how's your Hearts of Iron game going?
It's I'm just map painting actually.
Ah, gotcha. All right. Thanks for coming on. Take it easy. All right.
Thanks.
Yeah. I have to kick all these people manually. Do you guys have time for one more?
Yeah, sure.
One more guest? Liquid?
Yes.
All right. Oogie Pudgy? Welcome. You're muted. You have 10 minutes to ask your question.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I had a couple of questions for Victor, actually. Victor, big fan. I appreciate it every time I hear from you. Okay, couple questions. First is, can labor theory, like, what are the predictions that labor theory of value are making about what happens to markets when something like AI kind of like erases like entire industries? Like, what are predictions of, if any, that are coming up for that?
Yeah. So this is a really good question, and it is a really important one in the development of the theory, which is this idea of there are many different ramifications of this. Okay, I'm gonna go with the most obvious one first, which is that by adding artificial intelligence or machinery that can exponentially increase the productivity of labor, you can conceptualize this by you're gonna need far less labor time to produce commodities using artificial intelligence and other machinery, which is going to bring the cost of commodities down and therefore their prices down. And this explains very well why the prices of commodities, especially of like technological commodities, that they become more efficiently produced through time and through iterations, right? Because entrepreneurs find better ways of producing them at lesser of a cost. This is why we can explain the reason why these goods tend to be priced at lower prices throughout time, right? Another one is, okay, but what if we substitute suddenly all of the workers in economic sectors and we just replace them with AI? Well, this is going to bring a very big implication for the labor theory of value, because in that instance, we have created entities that can replicate, that can match the causal powers of human beings, because they can do everything that human beings can do, right?
Right.
So in that case, we are going to have to include the labor of artificial intelligence into our equations. And that is actually a development that I think is really interesting. And I wonder at which stage in history are we going to have to start doing this? I don't think we're at that stage yet, but it is undeniable that at some point we will have to consider artificial intelligence as value producing, right? And that is a really interesting question.
Maybe not to throw a curveball your way, but also I was curious how, for example, labor theory of value would help explain like the value, maybe the current day value of something like a Bitcoin or like a cryptocurrency. Because the way I understand it is that something like a Bitcoin is essentially, I would assume that labor theory would basically say that, well, the technology, the value of the Bitcoin comes from the technology and the work done by like the quote unquote miners, like these folks who kind of, actually, I don't know how to describe it very well, but I find that to be really interesting because the thing is valued right now at $60,000 approximately, like USD. So it's really hard to understand like the scale of that, like something worth $60,000, way more than a diamond. Like what would labor value say to that?
Yeah, so I mean, when we're talking about cryptocurrencies, we are on a world that it's similar, and we can conceptualize it probably. Now, I haven't worked extensively on this particular issue, so maybe other theories of classical and Marxist economics may have a better solution than mine. But my way of conceptualizing this a priori is the same way of conceptualizing other types of commodity money, right? Like gold, for example, right? Gold has value, but because of it being the money form that basically serves as the universal exchange value thing to measure exchange value in commodities, it is also subject to different laws, right? So we need to talk about monetary policy in that sense, and there's going to be different things that affect its actual market price. It is a really nice subject, and it is very complex. Marx has a really nuanced theory of commodity money, which can be extended also to fiat money, as Anwar Shaikh has done. And I believe that the answer to the cryptocurrencies is probably going to be somewhere approximating the answer to other commodity monies like gold.
I appreciate you guys so much. Thanks, Victor. I'll look out for it next time you're chatting. Later, folks.
Thanks for coming on. All right, that's a wrap. Get out.
All right. Well, see ya.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Not you, Victor. You're staying around. So I got to show you something you'll appreciate.
Sure.
This is the brand new translation, Marx's Capital. And it is fucking
it looks
gorgeous.
amazing.
Look at this. Look at that as a sewn spine. The paper quality is just phenomenal. Look at how perfect the print is. Just,
Yeah, it looks amazing.
Oh.
Do you usually like to write on the books, like your notes?
Well,
and the
there's
likes, or do you do
room
it
in the
on
margins
separate-
for it. That's what I was happy about too, because I read in English. I've tried taking notes on the Penguin version, and it's brutal because there's no space. That's just It hurts a little bit to write on it because it's so gorgeous, but it's perfect.
Yeah, no, I have the same dilemma. I have actually been able to resolve that dilemma with a tablet, right? So like I download my books into my tablet and I just write on the tablet. And if I ever want to have like a very realistic experience of what I'm reading, I'm just gonna be reading the physical thing and making notes on the tablet.
Well, that's smart.
Right, so that in a sense solves the problem.
Although I'm lazy because I have to turn the page on two devices. I don't know if I could. I don't know if I could handle that. Anyways,
no, it's amazing, yeah.
Good seeing you. What's up with you recently? Why are you back on YouTube all of a sudden? Because you were doing your you finished your PhD yet?
No, so I actually have still to start it because I've been working. First, I worked at a bank, and then I've been working as a teaching assistant at NYU for accounting. So now I'm considering starting my PhD in the next month. If it's not going to be now, then it's for sure going to be within this year. So I'm going to be working some more, or I'm going to start the PhD right next month. But I already made my first academic publication, the paper that I wrote on profit rate equalization, and I am working on a second one, as I was saying in the debate. I'm making a research paper on praxeology out of all of the things that I could write on. And it is, I think it's going to be an interesting one. Sometimes in the paper, I tend to get a little bit taken emotionally, in the sense that I make some very strong claims. So I'm like refining the paper so that it's more academically, it has a better academic tone, so that it can be published in like a prestigious journal. But yeah, I'm working on that, and hopefully I will also be publishing that at some point in the near future. And yeah, as soon as I start my PhD, that's gonna be like full research, right? So I want to do things also for YouTube, but I suddenly like find it hard to find the time for it sometimes.
No, it's fair enough. Congratulations. I'm glad that's all moving forward. No, Nice seeing you again. You take it easy.
Yeah, and I also want to congratulate you on your success in YouTube for these years. Like, it's been a long time since we've collaborated and the likes, and I sometimes like to see your videos and some of the stuff that you talk about. And I always find it interesting, and I think that you do a really nice job here.
Well, thank you.
So thank you for hosting this debate.
Oh, anytime.
And for everything that you do.
It is a pleasure. Take it easy, Victor. Cheerio.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
See ya.